Up next, the U.S. Capitol for a day. Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Gail Street, and you're watching Paths to the Present. Today's show takes us to the town of Brookeville, which was first incorporated in August of 1808, making it 200 years old this summer. We'll also visit a tiny historic district in Silver Spring that features a unique building construction. But before we get started, can you answer our history quiz? We're asking the question, who is this? As a teenager, he immigrated from Russia in 1915. He began working for $5 a week as a meat cutter and grew to be one of this county's most influential developers. He's probably best known for the Washingtonian Golf Course in Gaithersburg, but he's also credited with helping to establish Montgomery County's first synagogue and the once very popular Shady Grove Music Fair. Think you know who it is? Stay tuned. I'll give you the answer at the end of the show. If you're a regular Paths viewer, you know that Montgomery County is filled with places from our past. Keeping track of them is the job of the Historic Preservation Commission. Part of the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, HPC staff provides for the identification, designation, and regulation of historic sites in Montgomery County. Occasionally, we highlight one for the segment HPC Notebook. Some very unique houses sit north of the Beltway near Colesville Road, not far from Montgomery Blair High School. 2 front Colesville, and 3 are just behind them on Sutherland Street. They aren't your typical brick ramblers or colonials common to this area. They are simply designed with interesting lines and walls that shimmer with color and decorative accents. All are on the county's master plan for historic preservation. Notable craftsman and artist John Joseph Early built these homes in the 1930s. Today, known as the Polychrome Historic District, they were intended to be a housing solution during tough economic times. Claire Kelly, Research and Designation Coordinator with the Historic Preservation Commission, explains.
Well, Early was a strong believer in social justice, and in this time period during the Great Depression, he was looking for a way to provide affordable housing, but that also was attractive and that would be available to people of all means.
Early developed a new type of building material, poured concrete. He enhanced its visual appeal by adding colored stones and glass to the mixture. The result, a sort of pointillist painting with dots of color blending at a distance to an overall hue. More embellishments complete the style of these houses, which were very modern for their time.
The buildings are both Art Deco and streamlined modern. The Art Deco detailing is geometric and it's stylized, and you see that in sort of stylized maple leaves in the upper level, and then there's a chevron design near the doors that's really Art Deco. And streamlined modern is a rounded and horizontal detailing that you see in the hood over the door and the lines between the windows upstairs.
These are the only polychrome houses to be built in Montgomery County. Early died before he could publish the formula for his mosaic concrete. However, his influence on the development of prefab concrete is widely acknowledged.
This is really the culmination of 30 years of work that he started with the National Bureau of Standards, coming up with new ways to use concrete in construction, and he designed the stucco work at Meridian Hill Park. He also did the interior, the mosaic interior at the National Shrine of the Sacred Heart. He developed this use of concrete that later was used for commercial buildings throughout the country.
We are fortunate that these polychrome houses still stand today. Besides their innovative construction, they help us remember a significant time in our history.
It was a very hard time during the Depression, and This historic district really represents a time in our country when the architectural and the design profession rose to the challenge to provide housing in very difficult economic times.
We take you now from the 1930s back in time to the establishment of a rural community in northeastern Montgomery County. Before we were even a nation, a family moved into the area that would leave a lasting imprint. James Brooks settled here in what was then thought of as the frontier. Over time, he became the largest landowner in the area. His son, Roger, inherited most of it. Upon his death, the land was divided among Roger's 8 children. The portion received by Deborah Brooke is where we travel today. Brookeville is located 18 miles north of the district line along Georgia Avenue. It's a lovely small town containing a few churches, the remains of an old mill, and a newly restored one-room schoolhouse. Today, Brookeville is mostly residential with a variety of architectural styles. Looking at it now, it's hard to imagine that this was once a bustling commercial, industrial, and educational center. Architectural historian Sandra Heiler is a newcomer to Brookeville. She owns the oldest house in town.
This house was built by Richard Thomas sometime in the 1780s, and he built 3 more houses and on land that he and his wife inherited from his wife's father, and he actually laid out the whole town. He did 56 building lots, designed where the streets would be. His wife's name was Deborah Brooke, and all of the land that Brookeville is on, she inherited from her father.
Richard Thomas founded Brookeville in 1794. It was incorporated 12 years later. Quickly, it grew to a busy commercial center serving the surrounding farms. There were stores, there were 2 mills, and at one point, they even had their own band. It was a place that drew people from far and wide, and it was a place you could call home. Many of the early structures are still around today. One sits prominently alongside Georgia Avenue. Andrea Scanlon is the manager of the Brookeville Academy, which today houses offices for the town government. But when it was built, it had a very different purpose.
The Brookeville Academy was one of Montgomery County's first private academies. It was chartered in 1815. The Board of Trustees incorporated the school then, and it was started as a boys' school, classical education. The school grew, and in 1819 they were actually admitting females, which was pretty progressive for the time. The Brookeville Academy was a private school, and tuition ranged anywhere from $12 to $40 per year, just for tuition, not room and board, in the early 1830s. $12 got you a typical reading, writing, and arithmetic education, and $40 was the full classics, including languages, geography, history, literature, etc. And some of the students actually did stay in the area. They had room and board in some of the neighboring houses, and that was in addition to the tuition. The building itself is circa 1810. That's when the first floor was built as a one-room schoolhouse, essentially. A masonry structure that was designed to house 60 students was their guidelines. And at that time, the masonry work itself, the stone facade, actually cost $267. In 1834, they started work on the second floor, which was completed in the late 1850s.
After the Civil War, the school needed more space and relocated north of here to a property known as Marywood. The Brookeville Academy operated there until 1909, when Marywood became a public high school. Meanwhile, the original school was used as a meeting place. In 1988, the town purchased it and embarked on a significant renovation, adding a 2-story wing onto the back. Today, in addition to the town offices, the building provides rental space for meetings, parties, and cultural events. As a school, the Brookeville Academy's sterling reputation helped put the town on the map. Brookeville is also the place where resident Thomas Moore helped advance the science of farming. And something happened at Sandy Hyler's home that gave the town its nickname.
Brookeville is called the nation's capital for a day. It was actually for 2 days, August 26th and 27th of 1814, during the War of 1812, when the British occupied the city of Washington and burned the public buildings. The president, James Madison, and some of the cabinet and a troop of 20 dragoons actually came here and stayed in this house when they had to leave the city. And it was clear that although this was a Quaker town and Madison was a war president, the townspeople welcomed him. They were hospitable and they spent all day cooking for all of the people who came here.
When Madison stayed here, the house looked different. It consisted of only this center section, with this addition, which for a long time housed the town's post office. In 1820, a one-story wing made room for this dining room. 20 years later, 2 more stories were added above that addition. Over time, a front porch was installed, enlarged, then taken away. Today, Sandy and her husband are carefully restoring the Madison house, as it is now called. They have reinforced the ceilings, replaced missing parts, restored the floors, repaired the windows, and carefully added modern conveniences without interrupting the historic fabric of the home. This was very important to them.
I think for 2 reasons. First, it's a very old house, and it was built with great care by someone who was just a wonderful builder. So all of the cabinets are just beautiful. The moldings are absolutely beautiful. The doors are. And there'll never be anything else like this. Once it's gone, it's gone. And the second thing, I think, is that, to me, this 18th century aesthetic, this federal period look, is just beautiful. And so my goal is to restore it to that look. It's a matter of taste.
These are only 2 of the buildings that have been preserved from Brookeville's past. There are quite a few others, each with their own story to tell. All a part of this town, which served as our nation's capital for a day. Okay, so how did you fare on the history quiz? We asked, who is this man who immigrated to the United States with nothing and grew to become one of this county's most prominent builders and developers? In the 1950s, Sam Ike was named by Fortune magazine as one of the 10 outstanding self-made men in America. He's remembered today with his own highway. It was on this land that Ike built his Washingtonian Tower and golf course. The tower is still here amid lots of new development, something Sam Ike had anticipated long ago. Well, that's all the time we have for this show. If you have comments for us or ideas for future shows, send an email to paths.present@verizon.net. Be sure to tune in again next time as Paths to the Present explores the infamous Sandy Spring Bank robbery of 1920. See you then.